what you understand about capital is the investment process, the investment thesis, and the search for returns is a team effort. It's above all else, and egos have no place in that. Well, what really resonated with me was just this concept of searching for the best for their investors and their clients and searching for the best returns, absent ego and absent emotion.
And welcome to episode number 35 of the Rose Bros podcast, where the idea is to share adventures from other entrepreneurs, athletes, and cool people in general, all the while enjoying some Rose Bros coffee. This episode, we are joined by one of my favorite guests, Cam Proctor, for part 2 of our ongoing conversation. Cam is the Chief Operating Officer of PrairieSky Royalty, a multi-billion-dollar energy royalty company based in Calgary, Alberta. Aside from PrairieSky, Cam is an avid outdoorsman, enjoys spending time with his family, and is just a great guy in general. We talked about the current state of Canadian energy, capital allocation, renewable energy, sustainability, and a lot more. And hopefully this podcast finds you healthy. Enjoy! Cam, hello. Welcome.
Trevor, good to see you.
It's really good to talk. I'm excited to hear your thoughts on things.
Yeah, and I just want to say before we get going, this is my second time on the podcast. I'm really happy to be back for the third time, assuming all goes well. And maybe that's not a safe assumption, but if I come back for a third time, I think we should switch it around, and I should be the guest host, and maybe get you and the other half of the Rose Bros on, and I can interview you guys.
Yeah. You might be disappointed. You might not get anything out of that interview.
I actually saw your brother. Just slight anecdote here.
Yeah, where?
For listeners, yeah, I saw him this summer at Lake Lillian, kind of getting ready to go mountain biking with my kids. And
right.
Saw this guy walking out of the woods. Looked like he just walked off a yacht in like Florida or something. White pants, striped shirt, these kind of mesh shoes that look like they're out of Miami Vice or something like that. Maybe that's a little dated for some of your listeners, but long hair,
inherent vice,
and just Mr. Casual, and just walking out of the woods. And so had a nice catch up with him. Heard all about his adventures, and the book that was coming out has now come out, Chung Piece, which I bought on Amazon and read and really liked. So I'm looking forward to seeing the next work of greatness that comes out of him.
Well, I'm sure he'd really appreciate the compliment, and I will pass on the story from Lake Lillian in Invermere, BC to Jimmy.
I really wish I'd taken a picture of that. Actually. Yeah. Pretty funny moment. Good to run into him though. So
yeah. So you're downtown right now. PrairieSky has made the decision to go back to work, or are you phasing back to work in the office?
Well, yeah, we started phasing back in June. And so we took a really, methodical approach to things. And so I think the last time we talked was maybe the third week of March. On this podcast. Things were pretty volatile at that point in time, and everyone had been working from home for an extended period of time, at I think 3 weeks then. But the work from home experience actually was pretty successful in our view. So yeah, in mid-May, we put out a survey to our staff, just asking them how they were feeling about working from home, the challenges they were experiencing, sort of canvassing what sort of support we could provide them to make that more successful. And it's different for everybody individually. But, one of the questions we asked was, do you want to come back to the office? And what we found at that point in time was a pretty small percentage of the staff wanted to come back at that point in time, only about 20%. Some of whom wanted to come back under certain conditions, but we were more than happy to kind of let those who wanted to come back at that point in time come back. So we only had about 20% of the staff back in the office in June. And then slowly through the summer, we let people come back under some, pretty strict kind of guidelines and protocols. And then September 1, we reopened the office en masse to the staff. Now, the one thing I would say is it's not the same office environment that people were used to. There's a lot of sort of gating issues you need to get through in order to be back in the office. And so we have allowed people to work from home should they wish. So, we have some staff who are higher risk or live with higher risk people, or who, for example, visit people who are higher risk or have, parents that are in care facilities and things like that. So we've been allowing people the flexibility to work from home. And the office environment is working pretty well. We're different than a lot of companies in that we have a little bit of excess space here, and we have individual offices. So there's no communal spaces. So everyone's in their individual offices. So, it's working well. Things that I miss are probably in the office collaborations, which get a little bit stifled when you're not allowed to kind of group together. But again, it's just putting people's safety first in the office environment. And we'll see how it goes into the fall here. We have some people who are working from home because their kids are off school awaiting COVID tests if they have the sniffles. Yeah. And so far, all those have come back negative. And so we actually haven't had anyone directly impacted by the virus in our organization, which is great. But we'll see how long that lasts. But one thing we did do when we brought people back was we left everyone with a second workstation, all their at-home resources. We just left them with those at home. And so in the event people have to stay home for one reason or another or want to, then there's kind of a seamless transition between the office and home.
Since we last talked, COVID has really affected energy demand, oil and gas production, and the demand for petroleum products has really fallen off. How do you view the market these days post-COVID? Where are we at with energy and whatnot?
Yeah, I mean, I think when we talked last, there was pretty significant demand erosion, and it was really peaking. And at that point in time, the storage capability of the energy industry just really couldn't keep up with the supply that was coming at them against the backdrop of a dropping demand. Now, a couple things kind of helped find an equilibrium in the market. One was shut-in production, a lack of capital being spent. So, of course, oil wells decline or production declines when you're not drilling new wells or replacing produced hydrocarbons. So there has been shut-in production. There has been declines in the basin, both in Canada and then also in the US. And the other thing is, there has been a bit of an uptick in demand. Some of that demand erosion has come back. Gasoline demand seems to be up. Diesel and some of the byproducts from petroleum have been up. One place where we're just not seeing a big recovery, although it's been modest, is air travel. So jet fuel, which is a big end user of hydrocarbons, and that's obviously air travel has been pretty limited, and we're not sure when that's going to improve. So today, crude is it's been bouncing around between low 40s, high 30s in US dollars. That's where the market's at today. Very little activity happening in Western Canada. If you look at rig counts and how many rigs are working, I think today there's about 69 rigs working in Canada, and that's compared to a year ago on the same day, there would be 130 to 140. So wow. Rough numbers, it's in half. So, that's an improvement over where things were 5 months ago, but we still have a long way to go to get back to, a spot that's healthy for the industry.
How much do you think the problem with Canadian energy is due to COVID versus the way Canada has dealt with its energy policy as a whole?
Yeah, I think that's a challenging question to answer because it's both. Yeah, certainly. It's been challenging the last number of years in energy, partly due to access to capital. And I can touch on that a little bit separately, but also due to infrastructure constraints. So lack of pipelines, lack of the ability to get access to other markets other than the United States.
Yeah.
Partially compounded by the growth of the U.S. energy business as well, but also, really just no export market for hydrocarbons, which it's the biggest challenge that the industry is facing today. And then amplifying that is just really a lack of access to capital. So COVID has compounded that. Borrowing costs for Canadian chartered banks have gone down because the Bank of Canada has reduced lending rates, but cost of borrowing for energy producers has gone up pretty significantly. Yeah, with very little federal government support. There's been some support programs rolled out, but they either haven't proved to be attractive to industry or accessible. And I think it's been a combination of those two. But debt markets are becoming more expensive or inaccessible. Equity markets are inaccessible. And so in a business and an industry that's fairly capital intensive, it has been suffocated. And to get back to your question, I think it's a combination of policies and fallout from the pandemic certainly has compounded it. But this is, our view at PrairieSky is, we run a long dated business with a very, very long tail and a long duration. Yeah. And so I don't think about governments, whether it's municipal, federal, or provincial, as being pro PrairieSky for one party, anti PrairieSky for one party, or said another way, pro energy or anti energy. I think given the duration of our business and the importance of the industry, you have to be collaborative and work with all different stripes of government over a long period of time.
I read an article in the Wall Street Journal this morning, actually, and the title was America's Top Oil Field was desperate for pipelines. Now it has too many. And that was the Permian Basin. And I couldn't believe the difference between the Permian Basin, where now they've got too many pipelines, in Canada, where we can barely build one. I don't know if you saw that article or not.
I did. And I've been watching it fairly closely over the last number of years because, the Permian, it's a shale play in the United States. And so for listeners, it's very, very capital intensive. It's high growth, high rate, but with high rate, you get high decline as well. So if a well comes on in the Permian Basin, in all likelihood, the day it comes on is the highest production it will ever have. Right. And in the first year, it will decline roughly 70%. And then ultimately, it's kind of exponential after that, flattening out to a tail, which no one really knows because a lot of these wells are statistically still pretty young. Yeah. But to the pipeline question, a lot of these pipelines were built over the last 3 to 4 years to accommodate future growth in that basin. And there was significant growth, but as capital has been restrained and access capital is very limited, fewer wells are being drilled and declines are starting to set in. So whereas these pipes were built with the projections of growth and basically drill to fill, the drilling has just not happened. And now back to Canada, we have a very different type of oil production. A lot of those volumes come from heavier oil on conventional oil fields or unconventional oil sands, which typically have large upfront capital costs over a number of years. But when they come on, the volumes tend to decline at a lower rate. So there's less maintenance capital that's required to keep them flat. And so, a case can be made for, very, very long-term view of building pipelines and supporting those projects and the invested capital that needs to go into them upfront without having a massive amount of follow-on maintenance and development capital to keep them sustainable.
I just couldn't believe that. I mean, it seems like in Canada, it's impossible to get a pipeline built, but you see the headline in the States, they've got too many. Maybe there's more to the story.
Yeah. And I mean, the federal government bought Trans Mountain TMX a number of years ago now, and there's been construction on parts of that. I know I've seen parts of it being constructed in Alberta, and I was in Kamloops a couple of weeks ago and we drove past some of the construction in and around that area that was happening. But, one of the things that I think about when I think about pipelines in this country, and I do believe they're needed, and they're needed to the West Coast. I believe they're needed to the East Coast, given that we still import a significant amount of crude oil from places like Venezuela and Saudi Arabia and the Middle East to feed those East Coast refineries. But we also need pipelines to the south as well to feed the pads. But when I look at pipeline economics and I look at the environmental sort of criteria and the safety criteria applied to pipelines today, it seems crazy to me that every time I look out my office window in Calgary and look at the rail yard in the Beltline, I see rail cars full of crude oil going west. And the economics aren't as good. The safety is a bigger question mark. The carbon footprint is not as good. But it really sort of struck home for me a couple of weeks ago when I was out in the Lower Mainland doing some fishing with some friends for sturgeon, and we were along the Fraser River, which for people who aren't familiar with the Fraser River, it's one of the world's greatest waterways.
Yeah.
Just an unbelievable river system,
Yeah.
both for industry but also wildlife, and probably the greatest salmon migration system in the world. And we were fishing underneath the Port Mann Bridge, kind of right between Coquitlam and Port Coquitlam, and right next to a rail yard. And you could just see rail cars of crude going along this incredible waterway. And it really makes you wonder, where is the balance in the discussion between risk appetite and safety?
Yeah.
And pipelines are they're a better, more efficient, safer way of transporting product, but yet the industry has been forced into a higher risk, higher carbon, less efficient system because of pretty broad opposition. And I wonder when the pinch point is going to come where the anti-oil lobby understands or appreciates that the risk of that type of activity is just too high.
Yeah.
It would be a real shame to see accidents happen like what happened in Quebec a number of years ago at Lac-Mégantic, but also our national railway is a treasure, but it's built along low points and valleys, which tend to be rivers. So
Wetlands.
Wetlands. There's a better way to do it. There's a middle ground, and I hope we can all find a middle ground that we can support our industry, but also do it in a safe and efficient manner with one of the best global track records of hydrocarbon development. So.
Well, I was talking to Terry Edom last week on the podcast about the middle ground, funny enough, and taking a pragmatic view. And for instance, you're an outdoorsman. You spend a lot of time outdoors. You like to ski and all that. It's not like you're against the environment and you're against supporting it, but you also understand that we need a practical solution for energy. Yeah,
I am an environmentalist in a lot of ways.
Yeah, exactly. That's what people don't understand.
Yeah, and I work in the hydrocarbon business, and I'm a big fan of the business. I'm an advocate for the business. I think the industry provides a lot of the quality of life that we enjoy in this country, but it can't and it shouldn't be at the expense of some of the natural greatness that we enjoy in Canada. And I was talking to a friend of mine out on this fishing trip a couple weeks ago, and with all the negativity that's going on in the industry, with all the negativity that's going on globally, with all the weight that are on people's shoulders with COVID, we were talking about just how lucky we were. You know, even when things seem very negative and very bad, we're extraordinarily lucky. And I think the environment and the natural beauty of the country is something that we support as an industry. I support personally. And I think we all have a great appreciation for it. So it can't be, we can't sort of sacrifice people's quality of life to the expense of everything else. But we need to be able to foster the environment and have industry and economic development coexist with, and make sure we're preserving the natural beauty of the country. So, I mean, I grew up loving the outdoors, still love the outdoors.
Yeah.
You know, worked in the Haida Gwaii for, half a decade, and got to know, many of the local peoples around there, and they have amazing sort of natural surroundings up there. They have an amazing history. And I understand why many of them oppose resource development, but I think the two can coexist.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and there's nothing wrong with looking towards the future and maybe cleaner energy sources, but at the same time, where we're at now, there isn't an alternative to get out to the mountains and on your trips out, around the world. And so it just seems like a lot of people point the finger and they want an answer, but then they're not willing to give up their lifestyle.
Well, I think that's true, but I think part of what gets lost in the conversation a little bit is, I talked about this a little bit on the last podcast, although very briefly, but the energy business is really a technology business in a lot of ways. And an energy transition to a lower carbon energy economy is going to come from the oil and gas industry in large part, because they invest a lot in R&D, they invest a lot in technology. I mean, most energy companies are investing a lot of money looking for what's next. And I don't necessarily mean looking what's next in the next well, but hydrogen, renewables, methane reduction,
carbon capture.
And we have a project in central Alberta with a company called Enhance Energy.
Really?
Where and Wolf Midstream is the midstream provider, but it effectively takes CO2 from the Heartland Complex, nutrients, fertilizer facility, and then also refining complex in central Alberta, and permanently puts that carbon downhole into reservoir, permanent sequestration. And a byproduct of that is that it's an enhanced oil recovery scheme as well. So an old depleted oil field that's repressurized, permanently sequestering CO2 from industrial emitters in the province, then has the advantage of boosting what would otherwise be stranded oil barrels. So I've been told by the group at Enhance and their AAA group that they'll be the lowest CO2 barrels produced in the world. And Wolf Midstream, who's owned by Canada Pension Plan, has built the stainless steel pipeline to bring all the CO2 to that project. So it's just an example of, I think, the energy business investing in what the future could look like and should look like. And I know, many businesses are looking at hydrogen as a potential fuel of the future. The energy business has a big role to play in that, partially because hydrogen can be produced using renewable energy or electricity, but also through natural gas combined with carbon sequestration and storage. So I think the energy business is going to have a large role, it needs to have a large role to play in finding what that transition economy looks like.
Do you see a particular renewable that seems more promising than the others?
I think it's a combination of all of the above, Trev. And Alberta has been a leader in wind energy. We're not blessed with the hydroelectric capability that British Columbia, unfortunately, nor are many other provinces in Canada. But we've been a leader in wind. We're a leader in solar as well, biomass. But I think hydrogen probably is the next stage in that. There's lots of discussion around nuclear energy as well, and potentially adding that into the mix. But I think it's a combination of multiple options and multiple investment. And I think part of the reason for that is that you don't want to be too reliant on one single source, because you have, and I think about the electricity market in Canada, and you have baseload demand, and you need reliability and predictability for baseload. And that can come from a multitude of places, but sometimes the wind doesn't blow.
Right.
And sometimes the sun doesn't shine. So you need to have a whole bunch of different components in the mix that add up to, lower carbon electricity generation or power generation in Canada. Hydrogen, I believe, can be part of that, just because of the energy content and how you can transition high energy demand users, transportation, electricity generation to something that has zero GHG emissions on the output. So I'm looking forward to seeing what happens. It's kind of timely that we're talking about it, because I know tomorrow, I think, is the throne speech, the federal government in Ottawa. I expect that there'll be some nuggets in there about how they view their mandate and how they view the future.
Coincidentally, today's battery day at Tesla. Not to get off topic, but it's the big shareholder day for Tesla, and everyone looks towards them, right or wrong, for electricity and all that sort of stuff. So anyways, on a different note, about a week or two ago, PrairieSky purchased about 7 million shares of your own stock, if I'm right. So you guys obviously see value in your company and in the energy industry going forward?
Yeah, and it's it's a combination of things on the buyback. We've been buying back stock for a number of years now.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Talked about this, I think, on the last podcast as well. But in our business, we generate a lot of free cash flow. And there's only a certain number of ways that we can give that cash back to investors. That you either pay dividends, which we do, out of free cash flow. You can buy back your own stock and reduce your share count, or you can do acquisitions of like assets that are accretive, near, medium, and long term for your business. And what we found, particularly over the last 5 or 6 months, is that the best acquisition opportunity available to us was the buyback and the ability to cancel shares. And so the way I look at it, and the way my business partners looked at it as well, playing it to shareholders, is we have a dividend that represents well below 50% of our free cash flow going forward. And so we're effectively, whereas we usually buy shares kind of on a daily basis in the market, we decided that we would effectively pre-purchase our annual allotment within a month. And we did it very, very quietly through August, canceled. I think we're up to 9 million shares now on the buyback this year. And another way I look at it, although maybe not totally fair, but several years ago, we issued equity and bought a oil sands asset that will produce till 2070. And we raised money in the 30s. Today, the stock price is sub 10. And we effectively canceled all of those shares for $70 million.
Right.
So something that we bought for $250 million in 2016, we've effectively canceled all that equity for $70 million. And we still have the great, wonderful asset that will continue to generate cash for the next 40, 50 years.
That's just good capital allocation.
Well, we think so. And my view on buybacks is that they're very, very powerful if done properly, and done at the right times. And I don't like to play stockbroker. I'm not watching the stock every day.
Yeah, for sure.
Thinking, is this good value today, or will I get better value tomorrow? I'm watching the business, making sure we're making it as efficient and profitable as possible. However, when I looked at the stock, we just saw very, very compelling value. Where it was trading well below intrinsic value. And in an environment where capital budgets have been constrained, no one's doing anything, everyone's focused on repaying debt, this is really the time where you want to have the flexibility to buy back your equity and cancel your share count. We canceled 4% of our stock. That means it was effectively every shareholder owns 4% more of the business. The dividend generating qualities of the business are going to be compounded over time, and it still leaves us the financial flexibility to do acquisitions or buy back more stock in the future if we feel it's appropriate.
How much of your job do you view as capital allocation as the leader of a billion-dollar company? Is it a lot, or do you view it more as operational, or a bit of both?
Yeah, in our business, it's a small group. There's only 3 of us, and so it's something we talk about. It's something we talk about all the time. Well, the operational side of the business is very detail-oriented, very involved. But at the end of the day, we kind of know what our outputs are going to be in it. And we know, we budget very conservatively. So we always leave room to the upside. But I think we always want to make sure we allocate capital appropriately so we can always have flexibility and optionality to do creative things in the future. I think that's the hallmark of a good management team.
Yes. Coincidentally, I'm reading. You ever read The Outsiders?
Yeah, I've read it. Yeah, it's great.
Thorndike. The basis of this book is that capital allocation and shareholder returns is the most important part of a management's job, right?
Yeah, and it's a great book.
Yeah, they give a lot of examples of companies and managers that maybe you haven't heard of. If you look at their track record for the last 30 years their shareholder return is double digits, but yet nobody ever talks about them.
No, and it's interesting because a lot of the different personalities in that book are just not ego driven characters. And I think in a lot of industries you do find ego sort of driving into it. And there's another great book, and I'll send it to you after the podcast, but it's about capital research, which is one of the biggest institutional investors in the world. And it's about their history, but it's really about their culture. Yeah. And it goes very much hand in hand with The Outsiders, because when you read this book and you start to understand more about their culture, what you understand about capital is the investment process, the investment thesis, and the search for returns is a team effort. It's above all else, and egos have no place in that.
Yeah, for sure.
And they're an extraordinarily focused and diligent group. And what really resonated with me was just this concept of searching for the best for their investors and their clients, and searching for the best returns, absent ego and absent emotion.
Yeah.
And I think that's something in PrairieSky we try and do.
Really?
We're all big shareholders ourselves. We're heavily invested in the business, but we try and make sure ego and, personal preference doesn't in any way overtake or override what the best thing is for the business and for our investors.
Yeah. I mean, I just never heard of like Henry Singleton at Teledyne. I mean, it was like 23% compounded over 30 years, which is like Warren Buffett levels.
Pretty remarkable. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like no one ever talks about that.
No, I know.
Maybe you guys do.
We talk about that kind of stuff all the time because we love those little nuggets where people just, stick to their principles, remain disciplined, and over time, the thesis proves out. Now, there's examples where that hasn't happened. And there's also lots of examples where you get pushed or you get pressure to do things that are different or off topic. And, in a world where capital cycles are pretty fickle, investors are looking for returns on a daily basis, not necessarily over numbers of years, certain investors. Mm-hmm. It's a different world now. So sometimes you don't have the luxury to look at the long term. But I think if you always stay focused on running a good business, keeping a good capital allocation strategy, focusing on the long term, I strongly believe that beats out chasing near-term returns.
Do you find that attitude rare in institutional investors, the shareholder-oriented long-term attitude?
It depends on what area code they're calling from, but we've been really fortunate in our business to have some exceptionally smart people who we've learned from along the way, but exceptionally supportive of the vision. And of course, all funds, need to be accountable to their investors. And so they'll trade around the periphery from time to time. But we've been fortunate that we had some investors on the IPO who were our biggest investors at that point in time, and they still remain our biggest investors today. So it was great when we announced the buyback to get some feedback from a couple of our larger investors who've been with us for a long time. Very happy to see us do something like that at a point in time where they found it to be very attractive.
On a lighter note, as an executive in the energy industry, you probably get comments from family members. Do you ever ask you for cheap gas or anything like that from crazy family members?
No, I haven't had the cheap gas question, but I get a call from my dad every once in a while when he's looking at his portfolio and he wants to grill me. He wants a one-on-one with me like he's Fidelity. But
okay.
I always give it to him, but he's pretty smart. He knows what's going on, and he's always curious as to what's happening in the industry as well. Yeah, I don't give out investment advice because honestly, 100% of my time is spent kind of working in this business.
And nobody asks you for a code of the gas station for cheap gas on their way out to the mountains?
No way. Never happened, man. Nor could I actually provide.
Yeah, that doesn't exist, right? Your family is lawyers and really good lawyers, very, very high profile. Do you guys ever find yourselves in legal arguments at the dinner table? And
not really. Partly because I'm probably the least smart out of all of them.
Okay.
So if I'm gonna pick legal arguments with people, I usually try and pick someone who I think I can win against. But they've certainly struck a pretty good reputation in the Calgary legal community with both, my grandfather, my uncle. I've got a cousin who's a partner at one of the big law firms, and of course my wife Kim.
Yeah.
But, I try and stay out of that. I'm usually eat my food and staying quiet. I stay out of those things. So
overall, there is value in the oil industry and energy industry in Canada. You are optimistic about it, obviously, in general.
yeah, I am. It's certainly not without its challenges.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing that I think is proven out over the last 20 years that I've been in the industry is that the energy industry is good at facing challenges, finding solutions to the challenges, and then coming out the other end better. Now, I'm not prepared to go on this podcast and like make a call about what oil is going to be or natural gas for that matter. But one thing I would say is that, coming out of, the country's in a fairly challenging fiscal situation at this point in time. Energy services and all the inputs that go into it make up a disproportionately high percentage of the GDP.
Mm-hmm.
And so having a healthy industry coming out of this is going to be exceptionally important. One thing that's happening globally in energy is there's just been a lack of investment. There's just capital investment in energy has dropped significantly. So, there's the potential that demand improves in line with what expectations are. And let's be honest, expectations are built on a whole bunch of assumptions that are outside of anyone's control with respect to this virus. But if demand and utilization of products tracks in line with what expectations are, the underinvestment in energy over the last number of years, but particularly early in 2020, could set up for a bit more of an attractive environment to see a higher commodity price go forward. And I think one thing that's also helping with that is that, over the last number of years, U.S. producers have chased growth almost exclusively and to the exclusion of actual returns. And that I think is coming to an end. I think, capital providers have generally said, we're not going to reward company growth. We're going to reward companies for actually generating cash flow profits and returning that to investors. And so that could mean declines to flat or moderated growth in U.S. shales, which has really been the wedge of production in the last 5 years that has created some imbalance globally. So, but again, there's a lot smarter people out there that probably have talked about this or written about this. So I'm not sure what their view is, but I wouldn't say I'm bullish on Canadian energy in the next year, just given where rig counts are. Mm-hmm. I think things are setting up for a bit of a healthier industry over the next 2 to 5 years.
As a trained lawyer, what are you reading these days? What keeps you occupied when you're not at work? What's your reading list like?
Yeah, mostly James Rose books.
What do you read?
Talked about it. Yeah, Chung Piece was on my reading list. I read some business books, but I actually recently read a book called Killers of the Flower Moon.
Okay.
Which is, I'll send that to you as well. It's a really interesting book based in kind of Oklahoma, U.S. oil patch back in kind of the 1800s, or maybe not the 1800s, the early 1900s, when First Nations were displaced off their lands in pursuit of oil and gas. And it goes into the kind of the creation of the FBI and the investigation that happened on that. So that's actually a pretty good nonfiction story that was sort of industry / crime related. But to tell you the truth, it's been in this pretty volatile market. I get up every day about 5, maybe shortly before 5. I read the research notes, find out what's going on with all the different producers. I've been reading a lot about alternative fuels.
Really?
Reading a lot about sort of global economics. So yeah, and part of it is just trying to understand where the pinch points are for our industry, but also where the opportunities are. And Pam, my CFO, or our CFO, and myself work a lot on ESG in the business, because we really truly are a very ESG friendly and low carbon or carbon neutral company. But
that's cool. I didn't know that.
Yeah, I'm spending a lot of time reading, trying to understand whether it's different financial frameworks or different criteria that are being implemented in that investors are following when they're making follow-on investment decisions and what to invest in. So trying to keep ahead of that stuff as well. So, and then beyond that, just, mostly chasing my kids around.
Yeah,
so.
Absolutely. You got your hands full, I would imagine. We actually do a kind of mini series on ESG. I don't know if you saw that, but Rundle Eco Services, they recycle plastic liners from the oil field, Mike Rutherford. And we do kind of the odd episode where we talk to companies that kind of follow an ESG mandate. It's kind of a cool topic we've discussed in the past, actually.
Yeah, it's becoming more and more important. And, the industry has really done some very, very good things. They don't brag enough about it. But there's a lot of adopters of ESG criteria, whether it's governance side.
Yep.
I won't even talk about the social side, because I think everyone that lives in this province understands what the energy industry does for the social aspects of the province. But on the governance side, there's been a real push towards diversity, which is great to see. On the environmental side, companies are always looking for ways to reduce methane emissions, use less water, use less frac sand, do things more efficiently. But with PrairieSky, on our scope 1 and 2 emissions, we're carbon neutral. We have zero carbon emissions.
Yeah.
We do buy some offsets. We do buy some green power in order to achieve that. So I don't want to appear just disingenuous
for sure
on that. But Pam and myself and also Andrew, our CEO, spent a lot of time working on this over the last little while, partly because it's important to us in our business. But also it's important to our investors. Sustainalytics, which is one of the sort of global ranking initiatives, we're ranked number 1 amongst energy companies. Institutional Shareholder Services ranks us number 1 as well. CDP, which is the Carbon Disclosure Project, which is a global initiative to capture and report data, and there's over 13,000 companies that report to the CDP. We're one of the highest rated energy companies in Canada on that as well. So we've done a lot of work around not only kind of collecting data and providing that to investors and explaining our business, but also working downstream of our business with producers to understand what they're doing to create efficiencies and what they're doing to make their businesses better. Like I said, a lot of things to brag about in this industry. I think we've just done a poor job of sort of packaging it up and providing it to investors in the past, but that's changing.
Yeah, I didn't know that about PrairieSky. I mean, obviously you guys are working on marketing it more, but maybe that's an opportunity.
It is an opportunity. I mean, at the end of the day, we are focused on generating profit.
Yeah.
Because profit is how we feed investors, and how we contribute to our employees and the rest of society. I mean, we're actually one of the only companies
that makes a
in
profit.
Canada that's or energy. Well, we're one of the only energy companies that's a corporate taxpayer, and that's part of It's part of a differentiating factor where you generate a lot of profits, but don't spend any capital. It means you're taxable. So we're a taxpayer.
Huh. Interesting. That's the side of the PrairieSky I didn't know existed. Very cool.
Well, like I said, the energy industry hasn't done a great job of advertising that. And clearly, if you don't know about it, then I've got to do a better job of advertising that to people as well.
Have you guys ever thought about like planting a tree for every barrel of royalty you collect on or something like that?
I know you guys do that for every bag sold of the coffee, which I think is it's a great initiative. We don't set it as a target like that.
That would be so cool, like one for one.
But we do have, it's definitely something to think about. The one thing I would say is we do tree planting every year with our staff. And we do it in two places. We do it with the city of Calgary. They have a program where you can get your staff out, and part of why I like it is
just to get outside.
You get the staff out. Yeah, you get out, you plant trees, and you kind of see the executive out there, and obviously we didn't do it this summer with COVID, but you get out there and you see me with a shovel in my hand and Andrew sort of bending a pick and putting trees into the ground. And it's a good team building event, but you're also giving back to the community. And then for a number of years, I think since shortly after we started the company, we've been a big supporter of Fish Creek Park as well. So we provide them with some funding every year. And we also have a team building event out there where we do tree planting and also just reclamation of areas where you have kind of invasive plant species that are maybe suffocating kind of the tree environment. So we do those, but I'm going to take that away. And when I guest host the podcast on the third time here, I'll report back on whether we've changed that initiative to do something more along the lines of Rose Bros.
Well, in our small little way, maybe we'll have helped to contribute to PrairieSky's green image and some green initiatives.
I like that, man. You know what? You're helping me every morning get the engine running with that coffee. I love it.
Well,
can't get enough of it.
I appreciate the support. I think that's a great place to leave the conversation today. A bit about PrairieSky, where things are at, and different side of the business, what you've been up to, and it's awesome.
Thanks a lot for having me. And like I said, I really enjoy the podcast, and it's great to catch up.
Appreciate it. Maybe we'll meet up next time for coffee. Hey, thanks for listening, everyone. Hopefully you enjoyed the episode. If you like what you heard, check out rosebros.ca, where we will have upcoming shows. You can also find our coffee and chocolate there, where we plant one tree for every bag or bar sold through our partnership with One Tree Planted, a cool not-for-profit organization focused on global reforestation. Until next time, happy coffee drinking.